You know, of all the things that my father tried to instill in us, and probably a lot of you folks too, was the concept of good work. You know, he was always on about good work, hard work, you know. And he always closed out a conversation with me as, do good work. And he'd say, do good work, I'll see you soon. And I don't know if he did this to other people, but he used to go, know what I mean? So yeah, my dad used to always say, do good work, always, you know. And so now that I've had 40 years to think about that, doing good work implies, you know, not taking shortcuts. It requires forethought and sacrifice, and each of us, we only have so much capacity, you know, to do good work, to do work. And if you really want to be excellent at something, if you want to be exceptional, if you want to nail something, it's going to come at the expense of other stuff, you know? This is a silly way of putting it, but, you know, sometimes my wife and I joke, or we say to other people, you know, we say, hard work. It's hard, right? Hard work's hard. It's the kind of tautology that maybe a Daniel Webster or somebody would have really loved. You know, it's the kind of thing that's right up my dad's alley too, right? How's work today, hon? It's hard. Well, hard work's hard, you know? There's only so much of that crap you can do, and it comes at a sacrifice. And this, you know, the ceremony, me here speaking to everybody, you know, it's a tribute to my dad. And seeing as I'm doing a tribute to my dad, I'd like to do a good job. I'd like to do it well. And the Greek for well-ordered speech that's well done, the Greek is oe and logos, and we call that a eulogy. Now, for most of us, a eulogy is just like high praise. You know, you say something, oh, so-and-so was so great, and I lived a good life, and all that kind of high praise stuff. You know, and to be honest, I think my mom, my sisters, Cindy, and everybody, they knocked out a pretty banging obituary. So, like, that part of, you know, that part of the thing is covered, I think, pretty well. We, you know, what is it? I would say that that's how our family wanted to publicly remember my dad. And so, you know, like I said before, this is just some thoughts I wanted to share about memory and what memory is. And it may seem weird, but this is the kind of thing that I would talk to my dad about. This was right up his alley, you know. Most of you, I imagine, thought of my dad as an engineer. But my dad wasn't an engineer to me, you know. He really wasn't. That was never in the forefront of my mind, my interactions with my dad. My dad was a constant doodler. He was a cartoonist. He was a prolific note writer. You could not escape, you know, the millions of notes he left for people. He was a craftsman, and even occasionally a very serious artist, whatever that is. And you know, I loved my dad. Oh, here, there's some cartoons up here, probably his earliest ones. So he did a wonderful cartoon for my buddy Seth's bachelor party, which I had edit many times before it was ready for the public. I really loved my dad's handwriting. As a matter of fact, I was quite the plagiarist, you might say. I loved my dad's pens and his pencils, and I loved thinking about how he could carve out a living for our family in our little house, tucked up against Sugar Hill, you know, just right across the way. If we climb up and look across over Bristol, you'll be able to see Sugar Hill across the way, and then just right at the base of it is our little house on Cedar Street. So most of all, my father was a lover of language. And not to disagree with anyone that said anything previously, but I think the whole engineering thing was just a side gig. I don't think it really pulled on any heartstrings for him. And when we learned about my father's passing, luckily we were here on vacation, if you consider that luck. We were blessed to have spent a few days with him. We went out to dinner, and he didn't hear a word, but he had a wonderful time. And the last time I saw my dad, he was helping my mom into the car at Giuseppe's. The week prior to that, he came out. Our little girls, they have the same birth date. They're 2 years apart. They have the same birth date. And he had a wonderful time. And it's the simplest things that made him happy. I brought some beer from Austria that we used to drink. And he was truly grateful, astoundingly grateful, that I got a couple beers for us to share. So when I learned about my father's passing, as I said, I knew I wanted to spend time with him after he passed. So I gathered stuff, and we went over to Emmons, and my father was fully draped. He just had his right arm out, and this will be weird to most of you, but I thought of the Iliad. So Homer wrote about profound descriptions of grief and war-ravaged bodies and just the earliest accounts of human atrocity. The Iliad, among other things, is a portrayal of grieving. And, no one talks about this kind of stuff much, but the undoing of Achilles in the Iliad was the fact that he gets it wrong. He gets it really, really wrong. The wrath of Achilles, his seething hatred, the fact he has no mercy, it's the first words of the oldest story that we have in our Western tradition is rage, it's wrath, it's manon in the Greek. And, basically what the first story is telling us is saying, like, hey, that guy, the greatest guy that ever lived, the most cunning warrior, he's 99.99999% invincible. Yeah, how'd that guy die? What the heck did he do to get it wrong, And it is a story about that. And what Achilles gets wrong is he doesn't know how to grieve. That's the first story we have. Something similar comes up in Job. I'm not going to talk about Job, but, Job is God's favorite son. Job does everything right. Why is it like a train wreck, Anyway. So, the interesting thing about Achilles and the Homeric tradition is that back then, this is pre-literate, and back then those stories were already considered ancient. They're already old as time, And so all this stuff was part of the oral tradition. And part of the oral tradition means that you only pass down what was true. The most important stuff made it. The rest is left on the cutting board of history, right? And so nothing's written down, and so when they open these sort of stories, there's an invocation or a prayer to the muse. The muse, in Homer's Odyssey, it goes something like, "Sing to me of the man, muse, the man of twists and turns." That's one translation. That's for the Odyssey, right? The man, or another translation might be "speak memory." That's another popular translation. Instead of the muse, they say memory, if it's a more modern translation, right? So, and then you get a quick plot outline. That guy, and it's basically the muse looking up in a Rolodex of what we're talking about, and it's like, oh, yeah. And then an invocation closes by saying, "Sing, muse, tell us this story again for our modern times," right? So they're saying there's something about these stories, there's something about remembering that we have to do over and over again. And I think the ancients knew a lot about memory, and that's what we're doing today. We're talking about remembering. So my family, getting back to Bumpy, together, we wanted to go through the grieving process. And so when we all went in, and after we talked to Cindy, I held his hand for the first time, and I warmed it up a little bit, and I waited for a minute, and I said, "Go ahead, Mom. Reach down, touch Dad. say something. And my dad, he had a few kind of meaningful or prized possessions, so he had this watch that my grandfather, his dad, gave him when he graduated from school. He had some beautiful pencils that his father gave him when he went into school, and he also had a belt buckle that I made him when I went off to farrier school to be a blacksmith. And we got those objects. I took out the watch and my mom put it on his wrist. I took his burgundy little pencil and I curled it up in his fingers. And we both held his hand. And I said to myself, speak. Speak, memory. And I did what we always used to do. I read to him. I took out my very first stories, the ones we first read together. And in German, I plodded through the script, slowly reacquainting myself with the inner voice that I had left very, very long time ago. And over the course of several hours, and it was a couple days, we went back, we just talked. And as far as I can tell, Bumpy was just about as good at listening as he was 72 hours before that. Now, there wasn't anything I needed to say. Like we didn't have any hatchets to bury. I didn't have any unresolved conflicts. But again, I asked the muse, and stuff came up. I told my dad I loved him. And I really loved him. For stuff you wouldn't necessarily think would be at the forefront of your mind. It's almost the opposite of a eulogy, right? I started thanking my dad for being flawed, for his shortcomings, for all the things that maybe he accidentally got right? But, I just held his hand, and for a few more moments, we could just sit there. We could share a chat and, tell a tale. And when I talked to my girls, I had to think about, how I wanted to frame my dad's death. What I wanted them to be able to work out, What were they going to think, What kind of behavior were we modeling, that they could copy? What's Mimi doing? What's Daddy doing? Those kind of things. So I said something kind of like this to them, just off the cuff. I said, you know how we get to make memories together? Mommy has, lots of pictures. We have lots of stuff that we've done together. Those are all the memories we've done. When we're here, we get to make those memories with the people we love and spend time with them. But after they leave us, we can't make any new memories. We can only look back at what we did and share the memories that we made. We can hold Bumpy's, they call him Bumpy. We can hold Bumpy's hand one last time, and we can make one last memory while he's here. And after that, his time has passed, and we can only revisit those. And even though that's very sad, I'm sorry, honey. Even though that's very sad, everything you knew about Bumpy, it's still true. Right? That's what memory it is. And that's what Homer calls the shadow. To go to Hades for Homer is to become a shadow. You're something that can be observed, but it's not tangible, and it can't interact with the world anymore. Right? So that's what the land of Hades is for Homer. So once we send Bumpy's body off, and once we say goodbye, that was the last new memory. And I think that's profound. I think that's where the Greeks really, really got something right. Specifically the pre-literates, right? They were talking about the people that didn't write stuff down. They didn't have this. Everything was memory. Because for the Greeks, like I said, truth literally meant the stuff worth remembering. And we also get hung up when we read old texts, because this is confusing to a modern mind, Well, why is it this way one time? Why is it this way another time? Well, it's because things change across your lifetime, across eons of time. It's even more confusing. Read Job, like I said. What the heck's going on? Angry God, kind God. Mulligan at the end, you know? So that's why these old stories are so multifaceted. And that's why they're still touchstones for us today. So, you know, whether you're religious or not, you know, the use of sacred text and ceremony, just even the instinct to have a ceremony, right? That's so ingrained with us. That's so old. It's ubiquitous, right? And we're all here just trying to understand that. So, back to Bumpy. The girls both, you know, they said some stuff and they held his hand, and then they walked down the hill to Kelly Park, and, you know, I kind of watched them walk down, and they were doing all the little stuff that I used to do. I spent thousands of hours just wandering Cedar Street, Bristol, Kelly Park, all that stuff, and then they were off doing that same stuff. My sisters said their last goodbye. My mother said her last goodbye. We packed up all our stuff, a lot of the stuff that you see here, not that. And we took Bumpy's wristwatch off, took his stuff back. My German had improved considerably, so I read through his little folk story book one more time. And the muse left. I sat there a very long time, and I was waiting because I didn't want to forget anything. I didn't want to be like, oh, I should have said that thing. But the muse was gone, so I just put my hand down, and I said, "Do good work. I'll see you soon, eh?" And I kind of made fun of him a little bit and turned off the lights, and I walked out the door. That was the last memory I made with Bumpy. So right now I'm entering the phase of my life that sort of overlaps with my dad, my father. He was 39 when I was born. And, you know, as I grow, these memories I have of my father can be recalled and, more importantly, recast. So I think that's the important part, is when we ask the muse, or however you want to do it in your own language, to come back to us, we can recast these things in ways that are useful to us now and in the future. You know, future James is 50 and 60 maybe and 70 maybe, and I'll be able to look back and be like, oh, that's what my dad was going through. That's what he meant. That's why he was so cranky. Oh, his neck was broken. That's why. You know, all those things. So these stories aren't static. And that's what the Greeks really, really got right. So I'd say, while your minds were wandering, if there was any hidden memory stirred up or thoughts you've neglected maybe, just take a note of that. File it away. And if you're ready, you know, you can do this literally. That they meant this in a literal fashion. Say, "Speak to me, muse," whatever that is, you know, speak to me. Invite them in to work through you. Speak memory, right? Tell the tale once more for me in this time. And you'll be surprised how much stuff you can work through. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you.